I'm so excited. I just finished these journals. I have 6 of them that I've made, and I wanted to give just a little backstory on the inspiration for these particular journals. There's times in our lives where, sometimes we think things are so overwhelming and we feel so burdened that sometimes it's hard to find purpose or to find direction, and especially hard to find joy. And I think a lot of individuals that are involved in making these journals and different crafts of this kind have gone through something that at times seemed to weigh them down, and then they discovered different forms of art that really got them through that particular time in their life. And it's created like a little safe haven for all of us to do these different types of crafts. So the inspiration behind this was, it's been mulling around in my mind for a little while, and it had to do with some friends that I have that over the past couple of years have told me stories about the times when their relatives were held in internment camps during the Second World War. And you would think, wow, it's so very depressing. And what they went through indeed was. But the stories that they kept telling me were stories of hope and stories of coping, and looking past their immediate area within those barbed wired fences. They found joy and they found beauty, and a lot of them found it through their art. And they did these beautiful portraits, and they wrote poetry, and they did all kinds of things like that. And so I thought to honor the spirit of the hope and the grace that they showed in the circumstances that was forced upon them. They can show us, they can teach us how no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, whether whether it's economic, whether it is social issues, if it's our health, if it's the loss of a loved one, whatever has brought us down and created a situation where we just where it's difficult to find happiness and joy and to see a future beyond, what we're living in right now. That is what I'm trying to honor in making these journals, being inspired by the stories that I heard of individuals that found themselves in these circumstances. I'm not going to go into the whole big history of what happened there. You can look that up for yourself and see what was happening during that time. But basically, it was the beginning of World War II, and the government decided that they were going to take everybody that was of Japanese descent and put them, incarcerate them, basically. You can use politically correct terms, but they were hauled up and put into prison. Some people call them internment camps. Some people call them concentration camps. Whatever term you want to put on them, their freedom was taken away and they were locked up. Now, if that weren't bad enough, they were given a 48-hour notice that they were going to be picked up. And so, needless to say, when they got to their destinations, they had little to nothing. And so what some of the stories I heard was that they just, to cope, they would reminisce and talk about their homes and where they had come from. And so one of the stories I heard was this one woman who had a beautiful koi pond in their yard, and she had these beautiful water lilies. And so she kept thinking about the fact of, if you've ever seen some of these water lilies, their leaves, some of them can grow up to 5 feet across, and the flowers can be quite large. And they don't have any roots that's in the ground, obviously, because they are living on the top of the water. They're extremely heavy, but they're buoyant, and they rise up to the top, and they just stay on the top of the water, and they bloom, and they're beautiful. And so as she thought of her beautiful water lilies, she said, I can do the same thing. I may not have any roots here, this is not my home, but I can rise above, this burden that she felt on her being where she was, and still bloom and continue. And so that story made me think that that is something that all of us can really do. We can try. We may not always, accomplish our goals, but we can try to rise above whatever it is that is weighing us down and try to float up on top of the water just like a lily pad, and then try to bloom. And so this is the theme in all of these journals, is the lily pad. And throughout I have different scripts and pictures and stuff that have to do with that. Now the insides are all pretty much the same. I used a lot of the same pictures and papers and fabrics and things, but the outsides, each of them are unique. What I did is I took a picture that I liked that had some kind of lilies and water, and then I did an encaustic over it, and then I engraved some of the areas of the picture that I liked, and then I highlighted those areas. So this is, they're all encaustic, and on each of them I have little beads that kind of represent, the things that were left behind. Remember, they just had to take essentials, so they didn't, the ladies, they didn't have all of their jewelry. Just imagine, like when we go away for the weekend, we pack so much stuff, but all they could take was one bag, and they knew it had to be essential things. And so these things, I don't think were going to be part of their essential bag that they had to take for an extended period of time that they didn't know how long they would be. So I put these together, and this is handmade paper that's in the back, and it is kind of crudely put together, because I'm imagining if they made something, they wouldn't have a lot of tools that we would have, and they would just have to work with whatever was around. So I used fabric, and I used cardboard, and I used paper, and so this is how the covers look. Like I say, each one of them is different, a different picture, but the concept of how I put it together, it's the same. I'll show you each one of those. I just love water lily ponds. They're so pretty. feels really smooth. I polished them up so it has a really nice feel to them. And I'll go through one of them. Like I say, they pretty much have, you know, same amount of pages, a lot of the same prints that I printed out. So there's lots of places to write in. I have some vellum. I have printed out. I've done some sewing with some fabric on some of the pictures. Some stamping, some lined papers, some more vellum. Handmade paper. And I tried to keep with themes of flowers that kind of sort of resembled the water lilies. Some koi fish, some more lilies. I thought these looked like lilies also. I think there's around, I gotta double check, I think there's like almost 200 sides to the pages. It's quite a bit. So there's a lot of places for you to journal in. These are the ones that are 5 feet across. They're just beautiful. That's just halfway. There's a lot of pages in here. More hand paper. And there you go. Now, they all have the same pages, like I said, the amount of pages, which I think when I counted them, they were about 200 sides. And they all have different journaling cards in there. Now, in addition to that, what I did is I put in a little ephemera pack that has to do with the time period. If you look it up, you'll fully appreciate what was happening during that period of time and why they needed to focus to try and overcome the situation they were in. But this was what was posted at many of the government buildings. They were posted on street corners. They were posted at their homes. And this is basically instructions to all people of Japanese ancestry. Now remember, the majority of these individuals were citizens of the United States, but it really didn't matter at that particular time. And you read this, it tells them what they can bring, what they can't bring, and they had 48-hour notice that they were all going to be picked up and where they needed to be. And this was across the whole United States, so it isn't like they were given the notice and they said, whoops, let's get out of here. There was nowhere for them to go. So that's what happened there. In this envelope, I have some pieces of ephemera that kind of represented things that maybe some of the ladies wish they had brought along, or maybe they did. Like, for instance, when they were packing, maybe they brought some needles and thread to do some mending that they would have to do, because remember, they would have very limited clothing and it would wear, and you know, not knowing how long they would be there, they probably didn't know, you know, what they needed to bring. And here's a little card that has needles, and maybe even simple things like matches to start fires and things like that, because when you read into where they were taken, these things were sorely needed. Of course, their favorite tea, maybe they think that, you know, I don't know. This is a piece of art of a woman that was in one of those camps, and she's showing peace with these flowers. Later on, this one woman went on to write a book of her experience there, and it's called A Place Where Sunflowers Grow. And the premise was, you know, if a sunflower can grow behind these barbed wires, so could she. And so that's what kept her going. Some silk thread. Maybe they brought some thread, maybe not. Here is an envelope cover from the front of an envelope that was sent out there from one of these internment camps. And another one here, sent from the internment camp too. And then I thought, you know, sometimes we don't really think about what we would miss if we lost our stuff, you know. And I was thinking, this is a piece from a broken fan. You know, a lot of them were taken to places that was very arid and very hot. And I'm sure they would have loved to have their beautiful fans with them. And then who wouldn't have wanted their little chenille bedspread or their chenille robe to feel against their body, something that's soft and warm, and maybe some beautiful silk of some of the clothing they had, or maybe a piece of the lace from their wedding dress that they had to leave behind. So different things, you know, that, you know, you may not think about, but as you're sitting there, you know, you're reminiscing of the things you left behind and that you'll never see again, right? And then I enclosed some documents that were common for those that were there at the time. And everybody had their tags that they had to have and their cards to show who they were, and then if they were allowed to go out for any particular reason. These were their permits, and then these were their cards that the family members had when they were placed inside of the camps. Again, remembering that despite all this, they found hope and they found joy and they found the arts, and they focused, you know, on that to get through. I enclosed some photos of like before and afters. Like for instance, here's a average Japanese family in front of their home taking a family picture. Here's another one. And then the stark contrast of when they were put in the internment camps, where now they just have these barracks where they live. And you can see how arid and the dirt, and it was just dirt out there in the deserts where they were, as opposed to their beautiful yard. And here are the children. Here's those tags that I showed you before that everybody had on them, and going on to the buses with their one bag. And this little girl going, what the heck is going on? But again, you know, people found a way to survive and make their life, you know, livable while they were there. And then, as with all situations, there's irony, you know. Here the government has interned them, and yet they allowed some of the young men to join the military. And, you know, read your history. There was a unit that only Japanese could be a part of because the rest of the army did not want a Japanese officer in their troop with them, and so they had their own. So here their parents and maybe their siblings and grandparents were in the internment camps, and they were off to war. And then, of course, inevitably, some of them, while they were fighting for the country that was incarcerating their family, they died. And so here is one of the Western Union documents showing that their son had died, and then showing that it was sent to an internment camp to let them know that their son had died protecting the country. So these are all things that on the surface, you know, could be very depressing for the individuals that were in those circumstances. But, you know, I've had the privilege to talk with individuals that had been there or had relatives that were there, and you're not going to hear that from them. They weren't going to let it bring them down. Were they mad? Yes. Were they sad? Yes. But were they going to let it completely break them? And the answer is no. And so what I also made was this little pouch that these journals will come in. And what this represents to me is the one bag that they were allowed to bring in this long journey that they were going to be in. And so I made this to represent that that one bag that they were allowed to take. And it houses the ephemera and the journal inside right there. And so that's that one bag that they were allowed to take. So anyway, there was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. I put a lot of thought into it, but what I want you to take away is the inspiration, the hope. You know, what so for most of them, art got them through all of this, whether it was through writing, through drawing. Some of them would make these beautiful quilts from individuals' old clothing that they would collect from the different ones, and they found joy that way. So for all of you that may find yourself in a very low moment in your life for whatever reason, take heart and realize that you too can rise above float above all that's trying to weigh you down, and you can still bloom, just like the lily pad creates a platform for those beautiful flowers.